Hello everyone, I want to thank you right away for coming back to my channel for another video. Today the question is how to read deeper. And I asked this question because, I think I'm a lot like you. I think I want to get the most out of the books I read because being able to absorb information and apply it to my everyday life is going to help me reach my goals and actualize my full potential, and that's what I want for you. So hopefully you find something useful in this video. Today I'm going to be making a case for one of mankind's oldest tools for remembering important and interesting information. Whether what you want to remember is, mainly what we'll be talking about is, a book, but whether it's a work of fiction or a work of nonfiction or even something you found on YouTube, the best way to make information consciously accessible is to create your own commonplace book. A commonplace book is a useful tool for anyone who wants to unify their learnings in a single volume into something that is cohesive and concrete. For the sake of this video, we're going to be thinking about a commonplace book as being a repository for the ideas and bits of information that most interest and excite us. And really that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And it's, how to read deeper, how to get the most out of the books we read, whether they're assigned for a class or something we picked up because it genuinely seems interesting. How to read deeper begins with engaging in a dialogue with what you're reading. And I think this is something more people should be told, especially young people. So first and foremost, what is a commonplace book? Earlier, I called it a repository. And when I talk about a commonplace book, that's exactly what I mean, a storage place for your ideas. But I don't just mean a diary full of personal secrets and random thoughts. I mean something that is carefully constructed and carefully curated. A commonplace book is a journal containing what you consider your greatest ideas or your most important ideas. Think about a commonplace book as being something like a second brain. Now, maybe that seems a little silly or ridiculous, and perhaps it is, but I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because let's say on an average day you have 10,000 thoughts. Obviously this is kind of an arbitrary number, but it proves a point, and that point is significantly more ideas fly through your head during the course of a day than you could ever hope to keep track of. So what are you supposed to do about that? Well, I think the best thing you can do, or at least one of the best things you can do given the circumstances, is to document the thoughts and ideas that most interest you, allowing your attention to function as a filter. And in that way, your commonplace book becomes something like a second brain. That's why I tried making the analogy, and maybe even something more than a second brain, because what is recorded is by its very nature first processed by your brain. So it's not necessarily so much that the two systems are working together at the same time. It's that one is, again, a carefully constructed product of the first, and in that way is kind of its own distilled and unified living thing. So that's what we should think of as being a commonplace book. It's a notebook or a journal that objectively unifies our interests in a single volume. Now that I've more or less defined what I mean when I say a commonplace book, the question then becomes, why keep a commonplace book? So let's get to it. Let's ask the why. And two things come to mind when I think about why a commonplace book is useful and helpful for anyone with any kind of intellectual aspirations or educational aspirations. So the first thing is this: a commonplace book is exactly what it sounds like. It's a notebook you use to compile bits of information that you come across in your everyday life which are interesting and useful and maybe even aesthetically valuable. It's the best way to read deeper, and almost paradoxically, it's an act that's kind of, once removed from reading itself. So for example, I personally want to write great books. So what I put in my commonplace book, either directly or indirectly, pertains to my long-term goal of producing some beautiful work of literature. But it doesn't stop there. It goes far beyond what's directly applicable to my immediate goal. And I think the proof is, let's say, in the pudding. Many of the greatest thinkers of all time kept commonplace books. Really, it's something that I think has only fallen out of fashion within the last few decades. And I think by far the most famous example of a commonplace book belongs to Leonardo da Vinci, which was purchased by Bill Gates in 1994 for, in excess of $30 million. But why am I talking about Leonardo? The reason I mention this isn't to give you the impression that creating a commonplace book is somehow going to be something that's directly monetizable for you. I mention it because I think it's worth understanding that arguably the greatest thinker in the history of Western culture created what are arguably the greatest notebooks, the greatest commonplace books in the history of Western culture. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I don't think we can divorce Leonardo's creative productions from his rigorous note-taking. I encourage anyone who's at all interested to do a little bit of research on exactly what wound up in Leonardo's notebooks, because it's pretty astounding. Everything from the anatomy of a woodpecker's tongue to blueprints for perpetual motion machines. Leonardo was in constant conscious communication with the information passing through his head, constantly trying to synthesize what he learned in order to find new connections. And this, the act of, keeping a detailed commonplace book, is something I think more people interested in lifelong learning in a field or a multitude of fields could seriously benefit from. Which brings me to my second point as far as why keep a commonplace book. And that's, if you're like me, you plan on spending the rest of your life trying to learn. Regardless of how you feel or felt about school in the years following your graduation of high school or college, you want to continue to actively engage your mind. You want to continue learning. And this is why a commonplace book can be so valuable. As we continue educating ourselves, we read great books and we watch videos and lectures and we watch documentaries and we read articles. We immerse ourselves in what interests us most. One day we're reading a great piece of literature, the next we're watching a psychology lecture, and this process continues with subjects covering everything from history to chemistry to new languages. But a major problem we inevitably encounter on the way forward, which I don't think enough people are taught to understand this as they're growing up and making their way through the K through 12 school system and even higher ed. The problem we inevitably encounter is that we run the risk of losing what we don't make an effort to return to. What happens is this: as we continue to learn more, as we continue to dive deeper into different subjects, it's easy for what we learn to be forgotten, because it's easy for us to constantly be moving from one topic to the next, always leapfrogging to new ideas and leaving what we've learned kind of in the wake behind us. But if we don't make time to reflect on what we've learned, after enough time goes by, our ability to draw upon the ideas we've dedicated our time to is significantly diminished. I mentioned before that I want to produce a great piece of literature. To try and put myself in the best position to do so, I'm reading all the time. But my reading habit makes it so that if I don't make a conscious effort to document what information struck me as the most interesting and the most valuable in the moment, the particularities are going to be lost, and the breadth of knowledge will be reduced to something that's less acute and less clearly interconnected, let's say, and consequently it'll be more general, which for somebody interested in gaining a deeper understanding of, again, a multitude of topics and then applying them to a single artistic work, isn't as useful as it otherwise could be. Regularly using a commonplace book offers me the opportunity to return to every bit of information I've consumed that stood out to me. And I think that it can be just as valuable to you. And if you're like me, you want to reach your goals, you want to actualize your potential. And I think this is a great way to do it. Whether we're reading a great piece of literature or watching a YouTube lecture, all of the information that appeals to us can be organized in a single volume, which makes returning to it and using it that much easier. And doing this, keeping a commonplace book, is going to help you learn more. It's the best way to read deeper and to retain more information. And I think in the long run, it's going to give you an advantage over those people who have the same goals you do and who want the same things you want, but because it's an objective documentation of the interesting information you've come across, which can be revised and accessed at your convenience really, the chances of you being able to effectively absorb and then employ what exactly you've learned is going to put you in a profoundly better position than, again, those people who want the same thing as you but might not have put in the same kind of work. And I think that'll put you in a better position to achieve your goals and to actualize your full potential. So again, I can't speak to what exactly you should document in your commonplace book. That depends a lot upon your interests and your goals, and it's going to require a bit of thinking. But what I can tell you is that the act of recording what you deem most useful is the first step toward optimizing the time you spend studying a craft. And that, I think, is how to learn more, is how to read deeper. So briefly, the question still remains, how exactly do we keep a commonplace book? And my first recommendation is to do it in a notebook. I know there are some great programs you can use on your computer that make the information especially accessible, but I'm a firm believer that writing something by hand, which is to say, dedicating just a little more time to the documentation and construction of an idea, offers you a better opportunity to internalize the idea itself. And that translates to a more diverse range of interconnected and accessible knowledge. But writing by hand entails a kind of messiness, and that's the beauty of a computer program. Hit Control F or Command F and the computer finds it for you. But even this convenient means of locating a bit of information, I think, has a downside. And that downside, beyond what I mentioned about writing something by hand, is that you lose the benefit of having to sift through something physical to locate your ideas. The wider context of a documented idea, to some extent, is lost when you can just search for it and boom, it appears. I think that there's a real benefit to having some kind of physical form containing your ideas, something that is tangible and movable. And what's just as important as documenting all the interesting information that you come across is revisiting it. That's how we internalize and really digest what we've learned. It's how we increase the probability that we can consciously make use of the ideas we spend time with. So I've suggested a real notebook and I've addressed the problem of messiness, and that's why this next point is so important as far as the how of creating a commonplace book is concerned. Leave a few pages empty in the front of your notebook. Maybe this is obvious, but I cannot stress this enough. Create a table of contents. Organize the pages. Organize them by date and beyond date by using subject-specific and content-specific titling. By hand is my recommendation, and crafting a handwritten commonplace book requires serious organizational steps. But the effort that goes into carefully organizing your collection of ideas isn't going to be lost, and that's something that you have to understand, that it's essential. Carefully giving concrete form to your ideas is going to help you absorb them, and that's what we want. That's why I think doing it, the old-fashioned way is best. But I will add that using a computer program is still better than nothing. The two programs I recommend using there's OneNote and Notion. Both of those work really well. This isn't sponsored by either of them. They're just programs that I know from experience work well. Okay, closing thoughts. The question is how to read deeper, which is to say, how do I learn more? How can I learn more? How can I absorb more information? The best answer, in my opinion, is a commonplace book, a physical collection of the most interesting ideas that you encounter and dream up and come across. And by keeping a commonplace book, by documenting those interesting parts, you're going to always be able to revisit the wide array of material that most interests you. You're going to be able to learn more because you're going to be able to return to the information that you've already filtered for its value. And in that way, your commonplace book is something that's alive, something that is always being added to, and something that is growing with you. Okay, so with that, I just want to say thank you for sticking with me. I know this was a lot. Hopefully I was able to give you some idea of how to read deeper and how to learn more. I want to thank my video editors, Joe and Bach. I really appreciate you guys. I couldn't do this without you. As always, I want to thank you, my lovely viewer, for sticking with me through this video. I hope it was helpful. Please let me know what you think in the comments section down below. And if you found this video at all helpful or useful or interesting, I ask that you please like and subscribe. Thanks again, everyone. Have a nice day, and I'll see you soon.